All right, all right, all right. How are we all tonight? How are we doing? Can we hear everything? Feeling good tonight? Hey Estelle, hey Palm Dad, hey Pippa, hey Xana Grills, hey Titan. A big tired? Yeah, me too. I'm very big tired. A big worked too. Actually, my family has COVID making the rounds throughout the households. I have thus far avoided all COVID for 4 years, and I have a sneaking suspicion my luck may have run out. So, yeah, feeling a little hoarse. Probably gonna have to take a test tomorrow morning if I don't clear up. That's probably not good. So it was kind of a big day. Uh, France. There was some unexpected election shenanigans. Actually, kind of expected election shenanigans. That's not entirely fair. The far left party in France won. I've seen some absolutely wild cope from all kinds of people on the internet, wick cord ish adjacent included. Uh, absolutely fantastic cope. Like, oh, the left is now the center, and Ronald Reagan would have been on the left. It's been quite the day for all of that. So I don't want to go through the entire AP Live blog thing because it's long and there is a considerable amount of information there. But I do want to talk about some of this because a few weeks ago it was absolutely expected that uh, the far right was going to win, and the center and the far left made a whole bunch of changes, largely dumping some less popular candidates in order to see to it that this didn't happen. And so the result was that the leftists win most seats, but they do not win an outright parliamentary majority. So this is a little bit about what might happen. Our country is facing an unprecedented political situation and it's preparing to welcome the world in a few weeks. That would be referring to the Summer Olympics. That's from Prime Minister Gabriel Attal, who plans to offer his resignation on Monday. We and Macron could seek a deal with the moderate left to create a joint government, but France has no tradition of this kind of arrangement. A deal could take the form of a loose informal alliance that would likely be fragile, and already leaders of the leftist New Popular Front are pushing Macron to give their alliance the first chance to form a government and propose a prime minister to share power with him. If he can't make a deal, Macron could name a government of experts unaffiliated with political parties to handle the day-to-day work of keeping one of Europe's largest countries running, but that would require parliamentary approval, and the first session with the new members of the 577-seat assembly is July 18th. Meanwhile, no clear figure has emerged as a possible prime minister. Macron's office said he would wait for the new National Assembly to take shape before taking the necessary decisions. So this was a good thing, I think, overall for France. Marine Le Pen is well, uh, she is she's a Russian plant. Like she's a tumbleweed, guys. Uh, she would not have been good for France, the EU, or NATO. So this is overall a pretty good thing. However, there is still no clear. There is still no clear path forward for France. And France is one of those countries that has a very volatile system of democracy, where they kind of implode a little bit every time they do this. So this will certainly be something to look forward to next week. as it starts to take shape. And the other part I want to do to this, and then we'll get into Whatifalthist. It's not going to be a long thing tonight. Although with Whatifalthist, you never know. There was a warning from... what's her face? A warning from Le Pen. Far-right leader Marine Le Pen says France will be totally deadlocked with 3 groups of similar size in the National Assembly and none with a majority. But she says her National Rally Party will be in a position to have a majority maybe in a year. Sunday's events have been a jolt for the party that hours ago seemed poised to make history by putting the far right in power for the first time since World War II. I feel like if you're being compared to Vichy France, you're not in a good place. Like, you might have made several wrong turns. It's probably time to go home and rethink your life. Meanwhile, Le Pen is expected to run for president again in 2027. Macron can't run again, but he's vowed to stay in office until the end of his term. So this isn't over, and I want to bring this up because we have been having lots of discussions lately everywhere about the enduring fact that you have to continue to guard against the concept of authoritarianism. And people get frustrated with this. And it's true. It is frustrating. It's very frustrating to have to guard against something that's so obviously wrong all the time. But the alternative is to let them win. And we know where that leads. We know that that's not good for people. So I guess my point to everyone, much of this audience is American and much of this audience is Canadian. I wonder how that happened. I know how that happened. I don't need to be told. That are concerned about the upcoming election, principally the American election. My advice is always going to be: no one who ever ran an office, occupied it, is ever given a flying crap about non-voters. Oh, we have Mexico now. We're getting exceedingly close to North America. We just got to collect the rest of Central America. No one's ever given a flying crap about non-voters. If you want your issues taken seriously, you have to participate. And this election is a good example of that. Not like the far left eschewed electoralism in France. It's not like they decided to hold their breath and try to win purely. They recognized the system they were in and they participated. They made sacrifices and they made choices, and it brought them out ahead. And they made those choices not because it guaranteed a win or the absolute victory of their ideals. They made those choices because the alternative was unthinkably bad. So yeah, things don't look good right now here in the United States. It's looking like Biden might get washed out. Biden's not the only one running. There are Congress people running. There are senators running, and you have your own local issues, school boards, town governments. Participate in those things. The only way you lose is when you don't participate. It's just really that simple. This is something to watch. This is something to look for. But it's also a highlight for the victory of the concept of participating in your society in the way that it exists. You can want to make a better society. That's something I think most of us all share. But you should participate, because you don't get to have a seat at the table if you don't participate. And that's all I'm going to preach at you tonight. It wasn't very long, but it was hopefully useful. Whatifalthists, and we are going to move on to Whatifalthist, predicting whether or not we are on the verge of a nuclear war over a year ago. So I'm going to tentatively say no. But let's have some fun.
When the first nuclear bomb was tested in New Mexico, Oppenheimer, the guy who organized its creation, quoted from the Bhagavad Gita, the closest Hindu equivalent to the Bible, where Lord Vishnu said, "I am become..."
Wow, we're only 12 seconds in. It's not the equivalent of the Bible. That is imposing an analogous structure of Christianity onto Hinduism. It simply is inappropriate. Put more accurately, religions do not all have to map onto Christianity. We do that a lot here in the United States. However, it is a religious text. It is not. There are multiple religious texts in Hinduism, for example, the Vedas. They do not. There is not one authoritative text in Hindu.
Death, the destroyer of worlds. To be honest, it's kind of cliche to bring that up when you talk about nuclear war, but there's often a reason for cliches, since they work. By entering the atomic age, humanity very clearly started having the power of gods, power that the ancient Hindus, who knew more about the cosmos than we give them credit for, could only compare to what Vishnu had. What this meant is that man entered the era where we could wipe...
I confess myself confused. Did the Hindus understand the awesome power inherent in the splitting of the atom? Are we going to get an answer to that? Probably not.
Wipe out the whole of modern urban civilization in an afternoon. In the 80 years since, the human race has been tested on whether we can resist this temptation. It reminds me of another ancient story, the Sword of Damocles, where an ancient Greek king was talking to one of his servants. The servant said he would love to be in the king's position, and the next day the king brought him onto his throne, with a giant sword hanging above his head by a single thread. The king said that this was what the life of being a king was like, since so many envied him and were plotting to replace him. Imagine if you took someone from 200 years...
Why is this stock footage of a CPU cooler here? I'm baffled. The Sword of Damocles is a CPU cooler? That is certainly a novel interpretation.
Years ago, and they were shocked by all the technological advancement of our times and all the wealth we have, but then we'd have to explain to them how our entire civilization hung under the sword like King Damocles. This video is going to talk about if our whole civilization is fated to have this unimaginably terrible fate. Will the sirens ring into the night and the great cities of the world burn into irradiated chaotic wastes, and will we...
Well, no, because if the cities are hit by nuclear weapons, most of the sirens will be destroyed. So we can scratch that off the list.
Slink into another dark age. Also, with how tense the political situation is, especially with Chinese warmongering and the Russian invasion of Ukraine, this topic is very topical and it brings up real concerns that we'll investigate here. Looking back at this video, I'm excited for all of you to watch it. It shatters most people's conceptions of reality in a very key way and looks at the world in a way a lot of people don't. I say this for a lot of my videos.
I feel like most people can accept the concept that Whatifalthist videos are fundamentally unbelievable, but not in the way that you would like them to be, Rudyard.
And I hope it's true, but you'll leave this with a totally different view of your life from when you started. Well, let's get a Geiger counter in our hands and have some uranium fever.
I object. Oh, there's no bad sponsorship this time.
During a panic attack, you should start by trying to make contact with actual physical things, and then name the physical things in your proximity. I love the M. Byhold song 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which goes to this...
That's actually kind of correct. Holy shit. Somebody put it down on the calendar. Whatifalthist said a correct thing. I'm not sure what to do anymore. My world has been rocked. I'm having a panic attack right now.
Process. The complete horror of nuclear war, which we all subconsciously know and feel, makes it difficult to think about it clearly, and so that we can have an actual, clear, rational discussion here, I will do the same thing, and go through the realities of nuclear arsenals today. There are 2 countries with nuclear arsenals of real size, and that's been the case for the whole history of the atomic world, those being Russia.
Okay. Not for nothing. Actually, this numbers are probably pretty correct, but not for nothing. But 350 nuclear warheads is a fairly substantial. Like, 350 nuclear warheads is not nothing. It is the difference between this concept here, the United States and Russia, who practice a concept of total nuclear destruction. They will flatten you several times over. With nuclear weapons if you try to nuke them. Countries like China, France, United Kingdom participate in the same kind of system, but they participate in it in a manner called a minimal credible deterrent. So they don't necessarily need 5,000 nuclear warheads, but what they do need is enough nuclear warheads to guarantee that they can hit you and it can hurt. And 200 and something warheads will do that. Pakistan and India are principally concerned with bombing one another. North Korea is principally concerned with blowing up nukes underground. And Israel is probably going to nuke everyone around them one day in a fit of pique. But that's a different story.
Russia and America, which each have around 5,000 nukes, down from highs of over 20,000 during the height of the Cold War. After that, it's a very long jump to Britain, France, and China, which have around 300 each. Then Pakistan and India have 150 each, Israel 90, and North Korea 20. This means that the only 2 countries capable of actually ending
90 and 20 are estimates for both North Korea and Israel. They may have 90 nukes would be a lot for Israel. That would be very expensive to maintain on a long-term basis. And it's worth noting that there's a dramatic difference between like Israel's nuclear program and most other countries. India and Pakistan are kind of a league of their own because India and Pakistan are mostly concerned with nuking one another in the event that it comes down to that. Israel doesn't have things like intercontinental ballistic missiles in the same way that most other countries do. Nor do they have long-range, high-capacity bombers like Russia and the United States. And they do have submarines capable of launching missiles, but instead of launching submarine-based continental weapon or PMs, they have short-range cruise missiles with the warheads on. It is a kind of a poor man's nuclear triad, very much designed to ensure that they can inflict regional damage on people in the event to nuke people. Israel also is the only country other than North Korea who is a question mark. North Korea probably has nukes. We assume they have succeeded in doing this, despite the fact that we haven't seen overt tests yet. But Israel, principally because admitting they have a nuclear program would put them afoul of American non-proliferation laws, which would end their sweet gravy train of American aid, maintains a policy of basically fuck around and find out as far as nuclear weapons. Everyone else wants you to know they have nuclear weapons so that you know not to invade them. That is the principal objective of nukes, is to avoid getting attacked. The use of a nuclear weapon in a military context is dubious. We have long changed a lot of how we wage war to avoid the potential impact of nuclear weapons. So, for example, beginning of the last month, we all talked about the anniversary of D-Day. And D-Day is a fairly famous invasion event in World War II. Masses of landing crafts stutter up on 5 different beaches, and troops roll out and they try to take those beaches. Never again will that happen. Even barring the impact of a nuclear weapon on a landing like D-Day, you have cruise missiles and other weapons, precision strike weapons that could make that untenable to do. So, like, invasions are conducted by aircraft now, helicopters, large airplanes landing at airfields. we have changed the way we fight in order to accommodate the concept of nuclear war. So a lot of this is very high stakes IR hypotheticals.
Modern civilization are Russia and America. Even a nuclear war between India and China wouldn't be able to kill significant parts of each country's 1.5 billion people. Thus, for the only situation that would actually have severe long-term effects that could seriously damage the world's...
I'm going to disagree hard here. India and China could be fully capable of annihilating most each other's major cities, and that will, in fact, cause a significant amount of turmoil for both countries.
System would be a nuclear war between Russia and America. The reason that America and Russia have not fought a nuclear war so far is due to a good position in choice dynamics. Situations like global warming have the worst choice dynamics in that everyone is polluting the climate all over the world all the time, thus making systems of accountability or responsibility very difficult or impossible, and thus it's difficult to solve the problem. Nuclear war is the exact opposite, in that there are really two people in the whole world who can decide if we'll have a major nuclear war. These people are incentivized to keep the world from ending since they're already running world superpowers. Also, America and Russia are
sort of. They're incentivized to keep the world from ending because the part of the concept of being a semi-rational actor. I don't think we can call the United States or Russia fully rational actors as much as any country would be fully. Also, why are these countries colored the way they are? Sorry, I hate his maps so goddamn much. No, it's not. Maybe it's NATO, but some of them are NATO and some of them are not. Iraq is certainly not NATO in Iran is certainly not NATO in 1971. Hey, Maya. Why is China... Never mind. No, wait, I'm not done yet. Yeah, you're incentivized as semi-rational actors not to destroy the world. That is very much the point of this. It's not that it's a only two people can make the decision. It's not quite how it works. We won't get too much into that because I don't fully understand the system. But as I understand it, it is not beyond the pale for a General Ripper situation to happen. China and India and Pakistan have both placed command and control of nuclear release on the authority of field commanders in the past. United States can do this statutorily. Russia absolutely can. So, no, that's not quite how that works.
Are both oversized empires that don't really need to use nukes for survival, in the same way countries like France or Germany, who are very tight neighbors who could easily conquer the other, would probably have during the World War I or the Franco-Prussian War if they had them. We should also add some other details on top of this. The first being that most of these nuclear arsenals are not effective. For Russia, America, and more, as horrifying as it sounds, these nuclear arsenals are not maintained to close enough a degree as necessary, and so
all right. That's probably inaccurate in the case of the United States. So here's the thing. We do not do nuclear tests. So the only thing that they can do insofar as testing the efficacy of nuclear weapons is they can test individual components of them, which we do fairly routinely to ensure compliance with various standards. But those don't necessarily test the components on the missiles, blah, 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 blah. The thing about nuclear weapons is, particularly hydrogen bombs in a modern context, they have nuclear material, obviously. That's the point. And nuclear material has a half-life, and some of it has a extremely short and volatile half-life. There's a cesium isotope used in hydrogen bombs, for example, that requires fairly frequent replacing at a fairly significant expense. So the better question about a nuclear weapon is, to get the biggest boom, you have to make sure that you have adequately refreshed its fuel, basically. Nuclear fissile materials. The United States absolutely has the money and does do this. United Kingdom, probably the same. China, the same. France, the same. Israel, definitely. We basically pay for it. India and Pakistan, maybe. North Korea, nobody has a clue. You can fire off a nuclear weapon that does not have its full set of fissile materials, and it will hit a thing and it will be bad. It won't be fully as deadly as it could have been. But it will still be a nuclear weapon with a nuclear explosion and all the problems that come with it. This is a somewhat baseless speculation on his part.
A majority will not work if we try to fire them. Our maintenance systems are so bad we don't even know which ones are functional. This is even more true since the rockets that we can use to fire nukes are also very poorly maintained, and we have nowhere near enough of the rocket to deliver these nukes, thus meaning you should cut the actually useful nuclear arsenals to, I would guess, around a quarter of what the official numbers are. I know it's good.
Holy fuck, that is entirely inaccurate. All right, so let's talk about the concept of the United States and Russia and the nuclear triad, because this is important in the terms of understanding why this is bullshit. The United States, starting somewhere here in northern Colorado and stretching in a belt going up to the tippy top of North Dakota, has a series of hydrostatic tests on the thrusters, not in the silos, I don't believe. And not without making people get really fucking nervous in Russia. You have a belt of land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles running from the northern Colorado all the way up to North Dakota. They're somewhere out there. If I go wandering around eventually, well past places where it says not to trespass, there's an excellent chance that one day I'll trip over one. These are organized into missile wings, and they have various bases that man them basically 24/7. These intercontinental ballistic missiles each contain basically a rocket ship. But instead of astronauts, it has a series of nuclear warheads in it. So you fire off a missile, and it contains anywhere from 5 to 6 warheads. This is called the multiple independent reentry vehicle. And each one of these is capable of independently targeting something after it's launched. These warheads can be fired, and they take 15 minutes to reach anywhere in the world. That's one leg of the nuclear triad. Here's the second leg. A little town in Connecticut has a submarine base, and at this submarine base is the bulk of the United States Ohio-class nuclear missile submarine. The Ohio class is a nuclear-powered missile submarine. It goes by the identifying letters SSBN. These are colloquially called boomers. And each one of these Ohio-class ships carries a number of warheads on it in missiles, again, that are multiple independent reentry vehicles. So each submarine is very well equipped to start annihilating cities. These submarines are sent out on a rotating patrol and escorted typically by one of our nuclear attack subs, at least for part of it. This is the second leg of the nuclear triad. That's administered by the Navy. Third and final leg of this strategic triad is going to be again in the form of the Air Force, largely built around our Spirit bombers. These are stealth bombers, hard to detect, long endurance times. They can fly halfway across the world, blow you up, and fly home. In the event of a nuclear war, these would be equipped with missiles sent out against targets in order to nuke them. These are relatively small standard nukes. They aren't the same kind of multiple independent reentry vehicle. Any one of these legs, the reason why there is 5,000 warheads in our inventory, 5,500, is that we have enough so that any one of these legs is enough to cause utter devastation. And they are basically designed to operate independently of one. If you launch a surprise attack and take out all the missile silos, you still have the submarines and the bombers. If you take out the submarines, you still have the missile silos and the bombers, etc., etc., etc. There are, in addition to this, smaller nuclear warheads that are typically rated as tactical. These are the ones you would use in a military situation. Instead of targeting a city, you would target some kind of military target. Those are typically airburst warheads. They're tiny and usually mounted on cruise missiles. It would have helped if he had done some basic reading before starting speaking.
Writing to keep your audiences in anticipation until the very end, and I kind of have a reputation for doomerism on this channel. However, I'm going to lower all of your collective blood pressures a few notches this one time.
No, you don't. You don't have a reputation for doomerism. You have a reputation for being a silly boy.
The actual chances of nuclear war in our lifetimes are pretty low. This is since if you look at the self-interests in Russia or America, there's not really a reason for nuclear war. America is a humanitarian-focused nation where if, say, the Republicans start a nuclear war that kills 400 million people outside of America, for a bad reason, their party will simply stop existing, and either the Democrats will rule America for 40 years straight, or the Libertarians will replace them.
What? In the event that someone launches a nuclear weapon, what will happen is everyone else will launch nuclear weapons. Because you cannot judge. Remember what I said, you have 15 minutes to from flight time from an intercontinental ballistic missile to anywhere else in the world. There will not be a libertarian party in the event of a nuclear war. There's not really a libertarian party now. It's just a loose collection of people with very suspicious views on the age of consent. They certainly won't take over in the atomically strewn aftermath of the United States. I don't know fully what would happen in the event of this. Broadly, I understand that there is a bunker, and inside this bunker, a number of government officials would be placed. But again, they only have 15 goddamn minutes to respond, so that's probably not going to work out too well. In the event of a nuclear war, what will happen is your political party affiliation will become irrelevant because you will be dead. However, there will be a handful of survivors in some places that aren't really significant. The people that go to the bunker will declare martial law, and the atomically burned out husk of America will be ruled by the remnants of its government. Which absolutely will not be the libertarians.
Experienced so much angst for nuking Hiroshima and Nagasaki, when the conditions were much more favorable and reasonable to use nukes, that it would be very politically difficult to use them again. Meanwhile, also look at Russia. First of all, I'm a huge believer in Zihan's theories that Russia will not survive the next 10 years as a country. They're the modern equivalent of feudalism, with an extremely bizarre and dysfunctional economic, political, and social system that creates many reasons for revolution. At the same time, due to their horrifying...
They're not even remotely feudalistic.
Birth rate, they have basically no choice besides
Russia might not survive the next 10 years. They are in a serious bit of crap. We talked a little bit about it the other night with the sanctions are taking a severe effect on the Russian economy. The other half of this equation, and this came out a little bit today actually, is that Russia's casualty count in the war in Ukraine on the low end could be somewhere in the range of 500,000 dead, which would be absolutely devastating to their long-term demographic survival. And this is not like... Russia is obviously a balkanized state of many, many indigenous peoples ruled over by a Russian minority. This would be means massive losses among almost all of those ethnic groups.
Facing a horrifying civil war, social collapse, and more. Countries cannot survive with a majority of their population elderly, especially countries that aren't really rich like Russia. The chances of a unified Russia surviving, in my opinion, over the next 10 years is pretty low, and there's a good chance Russia will spend this entire century in a warring states period split between warlords, maybe even with Muslims and Chinese gobbling up and colonizing parts of the country. This state collapse does come with a threat of a different kind of nuclear war, which we'll talk about towards the end of the video. The only real worry is that the Russians get desperate as their society is collapsing and go full nuclear as a Götterdämmerung. I don't think this is super
Sure, that word is a fairly specific religious connotation. Also, there's an umlaut in there, so he's did that wrong. It's Wagner's opera, obviously. But doesn't it have a significant religious connotation as far as... Yeah, it's the Norse... Yeah, it is. I thought it was the Norse mythological apocalypse situation.
likely. I could see them nuking, let's say, Kiev out of spite, and the Americans wouldn't respond to that since Ukraine's not our
It's Kiev, you Philistine.
ally, and ending the human race is not worth it. The thing is, Russia is so outmatched against the Western world, as we've seen by their military, even being defeated by Ukraine, for Christ's sake, that even going...
I'm sure the news that Russia has been defeated by Ukraine is news to everyone, really.
Or this extreme option won't work. Something I'll throw in here for a hot second is that across the whole 21st century, we're expecting populations around the world to collapse, probably stabilizing around half of what they currently are. And expansionist wars almost always occur when populations are in periods of growth, so the chances that we'll have major...
Obviously, that's not the case. Just judging by the fact that Ukraine is being invaded by Russia, who has a collapsing populate. What? Also, we don't have that good of demographic data. Like populations have almost always been in growth. So I don't know how you make that association. The overall population of the world, by the way, is not expected to collapse. It's expected to grow. 2050, I think it's supposed to be, yeah, somewhere between 9 and 10 billion people. So that's some bullshit, unless he means the white population of white people, which he may very well mean, being Whatifalthist. And I mean, first of all, white is a fraught category to begin with. And I use this example all the time because I think it's really important to bring up again and again and again. The second iteration of the KKK came along, and not only did they decide that black people were bad, they also decided that Catholics are bad, and that Catholics were not white. This came as a shock to many people who had just yesterday been white. So here's kind of why I always advocate do not support the weird little racist fringe people. Because you might be included in the people who are okay with the weird little racist fringe people one day, and the next day they might decide, well, I don't particularly like these people anymore. Or another great example is who was considered Jewish in the Holocaust by the Germans. Like, were you had to be a practicing Jew? No, you did not. If you had Jewish ancestors going back 1 to 2 generations, would be considered a Jew and hauled off and thrown in a camp. Ethnicity is not the thing people think it is. It is very dependent upon who you are asking and when you're asking them. Which is why, and Hetman is a big disagreeer with me on this. He puts a lot of stock in ethnicity, which is why I am really reluctant to rest a lot of arguments on the concept of ethnicity. And it's why I am so very opposed to the concept of an ethnic state, because ethnostates tend to have that fascism problem, where they have increasingly shrinking circles of power. Oh, they tried to start the Klan everywhere in the late early 1910s. They didn't succeed everywhere, but they got farther than they did the first time.
Major wars of expansion over this century are pretty low. This brings up a key exception that no country will take the nuclear option, since the US, as far as I understand, has such a clear advantage that it's not worth it. Something I must admit is I am not privy to the top secret documents and projects going on in the Great Powers programs. She doesn't call me up every day and say, "Yo, Rudyard, this is my new missile program." The US might have secret weaknesses or advantages I don't know about, or maybe
the United States likes to undersell its capabilities. Everyone else likes to oversell them. One of those great rules of thumb.
the Chinese have a pulse weapon or cyber offensive that can neutralize America's electrical grid and nukes that I don't know.
Well, the nuclear weapons that we have in the silos are being upgraded, but they run on floppy disks. They run on floppy disks. Hey, transpositions. I imagine that's Stephanie. They run on floppy disks, and not the little floppy disks, the big ass ones that most of this audience is probably too young to remember. So they're not, 4G capable.
About the US has a missile defense system named THAAD. And isn't that so perfect? The boomers who named it have no idea what that means for people our age. The THAAD defense system can knock out half of the missiles.
It means Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System. It does not necessarily work perfectly. Also, this is way out of date. SM2s, I don't. Model of Standard Missile. It's not. I think it's RIM 6 now. What is it? Check. Yeah, it's the 66. That's what I thought. Yeah, they're finally upgrading it from the floppy-based system. Now it's not going to be internet connected. That would be silly. We had a whole ass movie about that.
Attacking Europe, the Far East, and North America by targeting those missiles with a counter missile that will blow it up in the air, which is super sick. Our rivals, the Chinese and Russians, have no equivalent. If either country were to start a nuclear rivalry with America, they would just lose, and so they have no incentive to do so.
Well, no. The THAAD system is capable of shooting down a number of nuclear warheads, but it cannot guarantee all of them. Second thing, we talked about multiple independent reentry vehicles a few minutes ago. These will include in them both real and dummy warheads to create extra targets to stop a interceptor system from being effective. Yes, good point, Maya. We are sitting pretty at about 10 subscribers away from 500. And 500 subscribers is the first magic number for YouTube where they let you start collecting people's money. And to be perfectly frank, we would appreciate some extra pocket change. So if you have not subscribed, could you please hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, or that dislike button. Hate views count as views too, and help us get over this little hump. And then we'll bother you about the next hump, but that's beside the point.
There are also hypersonic missiles, which move so fast that THAAD can't stop them. However,
wrong. All right. What is and is not a hypersonic missile is a point of some contention among aeronautical engineers, and they will say that it is much more complicated than the answer I'm going to give you. However, I'm going to give you a simplified answer. A hypersonic missile is any weapon that is capable of breaching the Mach 5 barrier. So, there are two types when we're discussing here. The first is a standard ballistic missile that we've been discussing since before. That will, by definition, a rocket ship basically is going to be hypersonic. It's fast. When we're talking about hypersonic missiles in the context of China, and Russia, we're talking about something that is more akin to a cruise missile that does not go on a parabolic trajectory, but goes on a flat trajectory and then hits a target. Kind of similar to how a Tomahawk missile might work now. Tomahawks are exceedingly slow because they have very large bombs on the end of them. Hypersonic missiles get up to high speeds and they're fast. Ergo, faster than Mach 5. These can be shot down by our fairly old weapons. We put Patriot batteries in Russia, and the Patriot batteries have shot down the Russians' hypersonic missiles. There is no reason to assume that China's is any different. We have some of the most advanced guided missile destroyers and cruisers in the world, with capabilities that are hitherto classified, specifically designed to stop this threat. It is not inconceivable that a missile can hit a American target, but as long as we're looking, there's a pretty good chance we have an opportunity to shoot it down.
As I understand it, the Chinese only have one of these, and the US has none. We don't even know if it's operational. From actions like this, whether our lack of knowledge if our nukes even work, the Chinese only having one hypersonic missile, or how the world's supply of nukes is a quarter of what it was 40 years ago, I hope you can see.
I do believe that design is a ramjet design, yes. Again, I'm a historian and not an aeronautical engineer. There's probably an aeronautical engineer somewhere in this community that someone can ask.
How the world's governments don't really treat nuclear war as an actual option. To show why, let's look at China. As the Chinese have drastically grown their military over the last 10 years to militarily compete with America, their nukes have not been a major area of concern. This is since the Chinese would be insane to try to compete.
Pretty sure China just built an additional 50 silos, which I assume they intend to fill. So that's not accurate at all.
With America when it comes to nukes. America has 5,000 nukes and China 300. As said before, there's THAAD, but also China has 4 times America's population and a much larger industrial base. I don't want to see how many tanks the Chinese can churn out if they want to. The Chinese know that the Americans don't want to start a nuclear holocaust, and so if they start a war, they are incentivized to wage a conventional on-the-ground war, since that's the only way they can get an advantage over the Americans. In its own cynical way, we're actually in a great position, where the public's fear of nuclear war makes wars much more politically dangerous and scary, and thus less likely, but also...
All right. I'm not going to say that nuclear weapons haven't had an impact on the relative peace that we have experienced since World War II. And when I say relative peace, I mean we haven't seen a major global conflict or even a very large coalition-based conflict where multiple countries form coalitions and fight one another. This has exceedingly little to do with nuclear weapons, I think, though, and a lot more to do with the fact that the United States has taken a fairly radical position insofar as its position as the dominant superpower. The United States has taken a position of keeping trade routes open, particularly as they are the only navy of sufficient size and power to be able to police waterways effectively. And other countries now participate a little bit in this. China, for example, sent some ships to go loiter near Yemen recently. But like, we have taken a position rather uniquely in world history where we do not monopolize trade. So take, for example, the United Kingdom in the 7 Years' War. The United Kingdom wins the 7 Years' War, and they largely get to dictate world trade after this. And this is a result of the kind of Colbertism and mercantilism systems that were dominant in economic thinking at the time. This was basically, you have a fixed amount of wealth. And if you want more wealth, other people have to lose wealth, which necessitates conflict. We don't view the world that way. The first big change to this is the fact that the gold standard or a species-based currency is basically non-existent. And it's not good on a number of levels, right? back a currency with a precious metal, and you are necessarily restricted in your ability to build out your economy. But this also takes away a number of perverse incentives to engage in conflict over resources. It's a very popular argument that a lot of people like to make that the United States went into Iraq for oil, which is a kind of silly concept because we are one of the world's top oil producers. It wasn't really about oil, it was other silly reasons. Or that we went into Afghanistan for their rare earth minerals, which also didn't really work out for us in those 20 years. Wars of conquest become less desirable to people if they believe they can get a chunk of the pie in a. So trade valuable has other knock-on effects, some of which are great, has not been good for the global south, for example. In a lot of cases, the extraction of this wealth has not been good for the global south in many horrifying ways. But by and large, in an effort to prevent war, trade is much more valuable than a nuclear arsenal.
So the actual statistical chance of having a nuclear war is pretty low. If the US and China have a war, I think it will be with conventional weapons, since both sides will do lots of saber-rattling and threatening to further their cause, but it's in neither side's self-interest. Another point to make is that America, China, and Russia are so far apart that it gives the Americans even less reason to use nukes. If China's big rival was Japan today instead, the Japanese might use nukes, since the worst that could happen is the Chinese conquer and enslave the Japanese.
First of all, the general rearmament of Japan and the conversion of Japan from a self-defense force back into a military force has, by and large, been fueled by this kind of low-level Cold War that has been going on with China. So if you look at Japan's naval buildup in particular, there are some troubling names emerging. They have a carrier called the Kaga, and it was a helicopter carrier, but now it carries F-35Bs. They're also building a 20,000-ton guided missile destroyer. Putting that in perspective, a 20,000-ton ship is 8,000 tons less than Russia's Kirov-class battle cruiser. It's big. And I don't know if this is true. I haven't seen anything to verify this except someone being a smartass. But apparently this ship has been named the Yamato, which might just be someone being a smartass. The historical example of this is the super battleship Yamato, largest warship, or one of the largest warships ever put afloat. It had 18-inch guns, but no fire control radar. So strictly speaking, it had guns that could fire over the horizon, but no way to aim them. Not the smartest plan ever. And they built two of these, Yamato and Musashi, and both were sunk in the Second World War. They started building a third and converted it to a carrier, but that was sunk by a submarine that happened to run into it as it was steaming to another port.
Japanese nation. That will never happen to America, since it's on the other side of a massive ocean where all the cost is borne by America's allies. America is extremely disincentivized from getting into a nuclear war, since it's
the general, and I am very insistent on this, and it's a very popular view amongst my fellow military historians, but not terribly popular in the public. Nuclear weapons are useful as long as they stay unfired. The threat of a nuclear weapon is much more powerful than the nuclear weapon itself. We are automatically disincentivized from using nuclear weapons, by and large, because the consequences are so severe that we don't want to do them.
It's literally the only way American civilians could get hurt. However, it's even more than this, in that if we had a nuclear war, it would be a lot less disastrous than people imagine. For those of you which saw my video on the BRICS, it's a lot like that, where people thought the BRICS were destined to rule the world since a couple social interests.
No one, and I mean no one, thought the BRICS alliance was destined to rule the world. No one. BRICS has a vast propaganda network that very much is destined to rule the world, or at least believes that. But BRICS itself is laughable. The Yamato, it was hardly used because it was too big a risk, kind of, sort of. So the Yamato was, for example, present at the Battle of Midway in the Second Strike Group. That ended up turning around because they didn't want to get blown up by the Americans. Although at the end of the Battle of Midway, the Americans were in no condition to blow anyone up, having just destroyed 4 carriers and getting utterly beat to hell in the process. The Yamato was a very large ship. It was expensive. It was difficult to operate. It became kind of a floating hotel for senior staff for a while. And it wasn't so much that it was too risky to use. It was they didn't quite know how to use it. The Japanese Navy got a little lost after Midway, in a very real way. They had a plan, and it failed spectacularly. And basically the cream of the Navy was... They did not have the ability to protect their ships in the way they wanted to. And more to the point, there was very little point, at least in the latter part of 1942, deploying battleships because the United States could. There was a couple around the Solomon Islands. But bringing out the battleships became a risk at that point, because it was not efficacious because the United States didn't have a lot of battleships. Now, 1944, when Yamato and Musashi ended up finally getting sunk, both in separate action, Battle of the Philippine Sea for Musashi, and part of the general campaign around, I believe, the Yamato. Don't quote me on the top of my head for the Yamato. They were both ended up being sunk by air power. They never really engaged another battleship in combat. And that was the other risk. But by the same token, a battleship in port was not necessarily safe from being sunk by air power. That's how the German battleship Tirpitz, sister of the Bismarck, was sunk, by the RAF continuously bombing them in Norway until they figured out a plan that worked. That's actually a fun story we might do one day. Happened to the Tirpitz.
We're incentivized to make people believe that, and no one was incentivized to push the reality that these countries weren't all that. Our combination of military interests looking for funding and environmental types have been incentivized to make nuclear war look much more dangerous than it actually is. There's no pro-nuclear war lobby, and so people never hear the other side of the story. Well, I guess it's my job to play the closest thing to devil's advocate and be a pro-nuclear war defendant in this.
What? Okay, let's talk about the history of the United States Air Force. In terms of my branches of the American military that I like the least, the Air Force is definitely up. The whole thing about the Air Force, at least in its early iterations, was that they were definitely pro-nuclear war. Curtis LeMay, you do not know who Curtis LeMay is, was the head of the bombing campaign, World War II against Japan. He's also one of the most salient assholes in American military history. This is the guy who tried his absolute best to escalate the Cuban Missile Crisis. He did his damnedest to ensure that Cuba and the United States was going to become a flashpoint, which would have resulted in nuclear war. And despite the fact that we had this argument in military theory circles again and again and again, after World War I and prior to, and prior to the end of the Cold War. There was this sentiment that bombers would be the deciding factor of any, and that a bomber would always get through, and that it would win war, and that it could coincidentally win a nuclear war. The United States, at least early on in the Cold War, formed the Strategic Air Command, the number of strategic bombers that was kept constantly flying, ready to go out on targeted missions, destroy the Soviet Union. Strategic Air Command was an extension of this idea. The truth about strategic bombing campaigns, absent nuclear weapons, not tend to work in the way they are intended to. Russia is finding that out in Ukraine, found that out in World War II. Germany found that in World War II. It requires a significant amount of effort to make the skies safe for bombers. We call it suppression of enemy air defenses, SEAD. This is a series of operations which are undertaken at high risk to the pilots involved that are designed to seek out enemy air defenses and destroy them. And in most cases, how you do that is you tempt the enemy to shoot at you. And then they have to light up their radar to target you. And they do that, and you blow up the radar and any launch facilities. This operation is undertaken by aircraft that are given a mission called Wild Weasels. And their job is very simply to fly around and get people to shoot at them in order so that other planes that are hiding see that happen and fire what's called beam riding weapons to destroy the radar installation.
Story. People's views on nuclear radiation remind me of the insane traveler's tales you got in the Middle Ages, where people in Europe believed there was a war between dragons and elephants in India, or kingdoms of dog people in an island off Africa. People took things that were real and then exaggerated them to the point of ludicrousness. I mean, look at what...
That's just a waterfall. I stopped at the... All right, let's talk about Fallout before he gets into this. I love Fallout. Fallout is a silly, silly thing. Fun fact, the nuclear radiation generated by the atomic detonations at Hiroshima and Nagasaki has decayed, gone. After effects happen, but it has. The nuclear radiation generated by weapons tests done in the 50s, basically gone. 60s is going away. The concept of the world of Fallout, where there is a consistent and persistent level of radiation, is fiction. The concept that you could see a whole new set of invasive species largely been created by this persistent level of radiation, also fiction. But god damn if it's not a lot of fun.
Fallout or Marvel think radiation does. The reality is that radiation doesn't cause completely bizarre mutations like this. Most of these are fake, and even if it does, it's on an extremely, extremely rare basis. It's more to do with genetic...
No, it will cause mutations and give you cancer for damn sure. It's not going to turn you into a death claw. The mutations themselves are not fake. They are very real. However, they are not dramatic in the way that fiction portrays.
Genetics that does this stuff normally on a bit more frequent. The main thing is that it does cause cancer, often at really heartbreaking rates, but it's pretty similar to diseases in the pre-modern world which targeted children or the elderly most, and communities can survive that pretty sustainably. Keep in mind that in the pre-modern world it was normal for...
Well, hang on, I gotta listen to that again, I'm sorry.
More frequent. The main thing is that it does cause cancer, often at really heartbreaking rates, but it's pretty similar to diseases in the pre-modern world which targeted children or the elderly most, and communities can survive.
No, it's not. Radiation sickness, is a horrible way to die, by the way. I have very few fears in life. Radiation is one of them. I have a friend who works in nuclear power, and every time I see them, I require them to show me their dosimeter. Radiation also doesn't largely target the children alike. Radiation will kill you. It does not matter who you are, radiation will kill you. That sun, that fucking sun, that big yellow orb is out to get us.
That pretty sustainably. Keep in mind that in the pre-modern world, it was normal for over 2/3 of the population to die of disease on a generational basis, and for plagues to kill half the population every couple hundred years. If radiation after a nuclear war did the same thing, the human race and society in
Just no. Plagues do not kill half the population. They actually tend to be localized. Global pandemics are fairly rare.
general would survive.
Very rare, actually.
Also, radiation does not have incredibly long-lasting effects. Chernobyl is now one of the most biodiverse places.
I want to point out the irony that radiation does not have long-lasting effects. You know what that is right there? It's a sign that indicates that if you wander into this area in the exclusionary zone, you will find radiated soil.
Radiation does not have incredibly long-lasting effects. Chernobyl is now one of the most biodiverse places in Europe after humans left, with a wonderful forest that has bear, moose, bison, and lynx. Nature
it also has areas of soil that's heavily irradiated and will stay that way for at least 100 years.
Recovers incredibly fast. These animals do have cancer.
I probably should bring up that previously when I was talking about radiation being dissipated from the detonations of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and nuclear tests, I was talking about airborne radiation. It does stay in the soil for a while, or the water.
But this largely winnows out the children and the elderly, not the population that...
Actually, I'm fairly certain most of the animals in the exclusion zone are kind of screwed up. Or they stick to the irradiated areas. Yeah, the biodiversity of the exclusion zone is largely due to the fact that it was abandoned because it was the most terrifying nuclear disaster to ever happen in human history.
Works or breeds so that communities can survive. Most nuclear bombs are also much weaker than people give them credit for, and even more so since they're poorly maintained. The bombs that blew up Hiroshima and Nagasaki wouldn't even able to irradiate the whole island of Manhattan. Modern nukes are much more powerful today, but most nukes are not of the largest variety, and the Russians were planning on dropping 2 or 3 nukes just to get the whole New York City metro area during the Cold War.
That is the whole New York City metro area, by the way, and quite a bit of several other metro areas. The reason that multiple nuclear weapons would have been used on the same target was the profusion of nuclear weapons. When you have 10,000 of them, and you have one shot at this, you're just going to fire off 2 because they're cheap at that point. It's not that they were trying to saturate a target, it's that they had the missiles to spare. And we already talked about why he has no clue what the hell he's talking about.
War. It would probably take even more for the giant Asian cities that are much larger than even New York, such as Tokyo or Mumbai. For many of you, if you're living in a suburb, there's a big chance you'll be fine, especially if you're to the west of your city, since winds normally...
You absolutely will not be fine. I want you to consider something about the United States infrastructure. Most hospitals are in urban environments. They would be destroyed. The knock-on effects, even if your suburb wasn't irradiated, the knock-on effects of the disaster that would happen would absolutely be destructive to
blow east in the northern hemisphere. Also, there's this idea of nuclear winter, or that a nuclear war would mess up the atmosphere and cause a horrifying several-year period with no winter, a real Ragnarok. In Cold War models, 1 billion people were expected to die from the initial nuclear war and another billion from the nuclear winter that would follow. The thing is that we don't know either way, and it could change, but the current computer models we've had for the last few decades say that this won't happen at all. There won't be...
That's by and large correct.
Any nuclear winter, and the world's climatic system would not be affected at all. At the height of the Cold War, the estimates were that
the world's climate system absolutely would be affected by nuclear war, just not in the same way he's thinking.
nuclear war would kill something around 1 billion people. However, the numbers due to nuclear arsenals collapsing in size now stands at 300 million. That sounds like a really high number, and it
what? Citation needed.
is 5 times as much as the bloodiest
Again, nuclear casualties have to include the knock-on effects.
war in history, World War II. But when you look at just India and China, who would likely get involved in a nuclear war, have a total combined population of 3 billion people, you realize 300 million's not that many. The horrifying thing is that China or India could fight a war, lose 150 million each, which they wouldn't since neither country has a nuclear arsenal of any real size, and then keep going, fighting a war for years with those kinds of losses. A horrifying point to make is that in many nuclear war scenarios, countries could just shrug off the pain and keep going. It's pretty common in the pre-modern world for countries to sustain horrifying losses during wars. Even though the Black Death was a huge factor, France's population in 1420 was half of what it was in 1350 over the course of the 100 Years' War. Germany lost 1/3 of its population in the 30 Years' War, and China was the same with the Mongol and...
Sigh. Okay. Don't actually believe any of them. However, let's talk about China and India. China and India are major geostrategic rivals, principally due to the fact that anything that China wants to ship worldwide has to pass by the Strait of Hormuz, and India has a navy capable of closing off that strait and choking the China to death. China has attempted to counter this problem, because China's principal issue is India right now, by purchasing port rights in a number of countries across the world, so they might try to get around this particular problem. China, or India rather, has tried to establish their own ring of ports. They call it a ring of pearls they can use to strangle China. They are not going to go involved in a nuclear war with one another. India's nuclear arsenal is aimed entirely at Pakistan. Can't handle losses like that anymore. Yes, specialization means that the kind of societal impacts you get the 30 Years' War and the French Wars of Religion and the 100 Years' War are just not sustainable. Weaving throughout the countryside in the United States and killing off the farmers means that people aren't going to be able to be farmers anymore. Do you know why land grant colleges were principally set up in the United States? To teach people how to farm.
Manchu invasions. Rome lost a majority of its male upper class in the Second Punic Wars. These countries all kept their national identities, stayed unified, and rebuilt pretty quickly. There is a certain difference in how urbanized the industrial world is, however. In most countries, if you nuked the major cities, that's 80+% of the population, compared to the pre-industrial world where 90% of the population was rural and grew their own food. A big reason Mao Zedong was so liberal with nukes was China was so rural it would be hard to kill that many Chinese at the time through...
What? Did something happen in China that I wasn't aware of? When was Mao Zedong liberal with nukes? Did I miss that? Was that a thing that happened? Did I just totally... Did a number of nuclear explosions happen in China and nobody told me? I'm not crazy, right? That's not what he said, Estelle. He said liberal with nukes. He applied nukes liberally, as if they were a skincare regimen.
Nuclear warfare. I think there's a very plausible scenario where a nuclear war today causes mass civilizational collapse like the fall of Rome. And a big reason why is that people today are totally dependent upon food grown very far away, and a nuclear war like this would cause major collapses in the supply chain system. The worst part of nuclear wars, in my opinion, are actually biological weapons. I've read enough history that disease really scares me, given it easily killed 100 times as many.
The worst part of wars is biological weapons. The worst part of wars are the knock-on effects of not necessarily a weapon. You teeny little tool.
people as war in the pre-modern world. Not all the Russian nuclear warheads pointed at America during the Cold War were carrying nuclear bombs. Some were biological. The Russians had genetically engineered a version of the Black Death and a couple others that modern science was immune to.
What? Why would you... You know what happens if I fire off a missile full of, for example, smallpox at you? I will infect a small area with smallpox. If I fire a nuclear missile with smallpox at you, it will incinerate the smallpox. That's not how you deliver a biological weapon. Also, modern science is not immune to the plague. I'm not sure what that is. You can get vaccinated against the plague. If you are treated, you might survive, kind of, sort of. It's very touch and go. It depends on which variant of the plague it is. Don't get the plague, everybody.
That they were willing to fire on America in a war. It would be so ironic and so true to our character if we humans beat the horrifying plagues of the pre-modern world, only to let the genie out of the bottle again ourselves. You can't keep Pandora from opening the box or Eve from eating the fruit of knowledge, I guess. So far...
No. Those are allegories.
In this video, we've just been talking about the near future. However, over the long term, what are the chances of a nuclear war happening in, for example, the next 1,000 years? I don't know, but here are some of my thoughts.
I don't know. You should have stopped there. End of video.
The first is that we humans are kind of dumb, and if we go a long time without using nukes, people
I'm willing to bet that you're pretty dumb.
Might forget how scary they are. Their invention is still in living memory, and so people today are still in shock about them. I think the chances that some ruler will use nukes...
I'm not sure I would call the atomic bombings at Hiroshima and Nagasaki living memory.
For the next 1,000 years are pretty high just for this reason. The amount of fanatics over history is large enough that the chances some nutjob gets nukes are high. Although Mao Zedong is one of the most psychotic people ever in history, and he had nukes and never used them. People...
But I thought he used them liberally!
Like to say that nuclear bombs have stopped war forever. I think this is laughable. The core truth of all history and time is Darwinistic competition, which occurs at every single level of society.
I'm sorry, what? No. No, it's not. We very specifically managed to get ourselves out of that cycle. This is what happens, Rudyard, when you quit after a semester of college because the college doesn't have the absolute gall to validate your preconceived silly little notions about the world. Social Darwinism is not a real thing. Social Darwinism is a thing that assholes use to justify eugenics programs. This man actually named Rudyard? Yes, fortunately.
Through dating, the free market, or wars between nations. People need Darwinistic competition to keep things real, and nations without external opponents fall to tyranny, social collapse, and decadence.
No, I want to forever dispel the notion that dating is a Darwinistic fool. I have been on dates, I have been in relationships, and I am not the fittest member of this species. I have kidney disease. It has affected every aspect of my life. People still like me. The reason that people don't like you, Rudyard, is because you are a weird, weird little man.
Every single time. The world changes, and with it politics must change. Imagine how irrational it would be if we just chose to freeze borders in 1800 arbitrarily. India would still be a British colony, the Russian Empire would still exist, and the Spanish would still control all of Latin America, including Texas and California.
Well, not for nothing, but borders are kind of arbitrary at any given time.
Conquest, empires, and war are all necessary to rebalance the global political ecosystem. Thus, the
No, they are not. That is why there has been no significant wars of conquest until now in half the world.
decision
Also, Brazil was Portuguese.
our society made in 1945 to ban any border transfers and wars is just insane. You can't maintain it. The only people I find who argue that we will never have a
I mean, no. By and large, it has been maintained very effectively. There are some fairly notable exceptions throughout the last couple decades, and it's mostly Israel, to be perfectly frank. But by and large, wars of conquest have not occurred anywhere in the world until recently.
war in the future are those without history background. If you read enough history, you see how political orders become stagnant and need war. Imagine a Europe where
No, you don't see that. I am a military historian, and I am happy to tell you that that is not how the world works. Wars tend to happen not because things are stagnant, but because things are collapsing.
World War I never happened and all the 19th century social orders existed today. There have been eras of peace as long and longer than the current one that has gone on since World War II, with some examples being the
You can't, again, this is the first time we've had a truly global society. So you can't compare that as a matter of like, also these maps, holy fuck, what is wrong with him? African tribes, this is Aboriginal, oh my god. Apples and oranges, Rudyard, apples and oranges.
19th century or the 200-year Pax Romana. Remember when people said war in Europe was impossible and now Russia's in Ukraine? Long peaces like this are normally a function of a hegemonic superpower making war irrational for most other players.
Who said that war couldn't happen in Europe? No one said that.
Whether Britain, Rome, or America, rather than goodwill or moral advancement on the part of the people involved. I hope this video has shown how countries can have nuclear weapons and not wage a nuclear war, and even if they tried, there's a solid chance history would just continue.
Nobody understands what this video has shown.
However, once we know that war is necessary, it also makes the chances of nuclear war higher, since we know we'll have to have wars. There are several mitigating.
That is an entirely contradictory message. You can't what? We won't have nuclear war because it's not advantageous, but we will have war and therefore we will have nuclear war. Did you read that set of sentences when you wrote them? Did it not strike you as logically problematic?
Factors to look at, though. The first is that military technology changes extremely rapidly. In the industrial world, the balance of military technology, and with it the geopolitical implications that come from it, radically change every few decades. In the industrial world, the American Civil War, World War I, World War II, and the Cold War...
I mean, you could have said that about virtually any military situation at any time. They are not static and tend to change over the decades. Anywhere in the world. And that's not a statement that means anything.
All took place in the course of a single lifetime, but the balance of war and strategy was radically changed by how technology did for each of those wars. Predicting the future of military technology is up there for one of the hardest jobs ever. However, I can put a pretty high bet that some military technology will emerge over the next 200 years that will make nuclear weapons obsolete. On top of this, we're getting into...
Yeah, we're gonna have motherfucking space lasers, dude.
Some real woo-woo stuff, but on the more obscure and long-form civilizational cycles of history, we're going to be looking at decentralization.
That doesn't exist, by the way. It doesn't. If you have any book written by someone who proclaims civilizational cycles of history, you know what you have? You have an emergency stockpile of toilet paper in case the COVID toilet paper rush ever happens again.
Centralization over the next 1,000 years. The height of centralization on a political level was around the world wars with European colonial empires, and then the bipolar Cold War world, and then the unipolar America.
Was it bipolar in the factor that it was constantly changing its mood? Monopolar. Multipolar. Not bipolar.
American dominated one, and the other height on the economic and social basis around 1990, with giant media and corporations managing everything. All the cultural trends since, though, have...
Did the Mongols use stirrups? I'm not sure. I think they might have not. Stirrups were definitely around by then. Oh, they did use stirrups. Okay. I know some horse archers can do their horse archer thing by like gripping their knees on the horse and turning, and those people are insane. Oh, screw it. We're doing the Mike Loads video. That's enough Whatifalthist. He's wrong. One more thing before we go. Mike Loads, you might recognize as a Tish. Mike Loads, you might recognize, does a lot of History Channel type and documentary type things about ancient weapons. He is a fairly significant military historian. He has a YouTube channel. He doesn't do much, but I love this video. It's just Mike Loads doing the thing from Brave, where he races to the glen firing arrows. Here comes Mike Loads for the win. This is a demonstration of an elderly British historian firing arrows at targets that are 10 meters away on horseback. All right, that was fun. I enjoy that. That's going to be it for tonight. I'm going to look at something real quick. I want to thank everyone who let us reach our goal of 500 subscribers. Can he backflip with a horse? Probably not. I appreciate it. I still would like to encourage everyone to like and subscribe. It's nice. It makes me feel special. We will be back on Wednesday. Hetman wants to be here for the finishing discussion of the October 7th report from the United Nations. And he has an article he wants us to go over. I want to finish that up and kind of get there as far as the making space for those victims is concerned. So that was what we will be back for Wednesday, and other stuff throughout the week as I feel like it. So with that, I want to thank everybody and wish you all a very good night. Have a really good week.
partigiano, questo è il fiore. Questo è il fiore del partigiano, questo è il fiore. Questo è il fiore del partigiano, questo è il fiore. Questo è il fiore del partigiano. Una mattina mi sono alzato, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. Una mattina mi sono alzato e ho trovato l'invasor. Oh partigiano, portami via, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. Partigiano, portami via, che mi sento di morire. Questo è il fiore del partigiano. Questo è il fiore del partigiano. E se io muoio da partigiano,